The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the sterile corridors of St. Catherine's Medical Center. At 5:47 a.m., the hospital existed in that peaceful liminal space before the controlled chaos of the day. Shift began. Her worn sneakers squeaked softly against the polished linoleum as she methodically cleaned each room, moving like a ghost through halls where life and death decisions happened every day. To the doctors, nurses, and administrators hurrying past, Maria was background scenery, the woman who emptied trash, mopped floors, and kept their world spotless. None of them suspected that this quiet immigrant in cleaning scrubs possessed skills that would soon mean the difference between life and death for people she'd never met. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 3 years, Maria had perfected the art of invisibility. At St. Catherine's, she arrived at 5 a.m. sharp every morning, completed her rounds with quiet efficiency, and left each day having spoken no more than a dozen words to anyone. Her supervisor, Janet Morrison, appreciated Maria's reliability, but never looked deeper than her punctuality and work quality. To Janet, Maria was the ideal employee, dependable, uncomplaining, and forgettable. But Maria Elena Santos carried secrets that would have stunned anyone who bothered to look beyond the surface. Before she ever held a mop or wheeled a cleaning cart, she had commanded the skies as a major in the Colombian Air Force. For 12 years, she had piloted helicopters through mountain ranges that disappeared into clouds, extracted wounded soldiers from combat zones, and performed emergency medical evacuations in conditions that would terrify civilian pilots. Those same hands that now scrub at hospital floors had once guided multi-million-dollar aircraft through impossible missions with surgical precision. The journey to America hadn't been a choice. It had been a necessity. When cartel violence escalated in her region of Colombia, Maria faced an impossible decision: stay and risk her daughter's safety, or leave everything behind for an uncertain future. She chose Isabella's life over her own career, trading her pilot's wings for a cleaning uniform because it was the only work available to someone whose military credentials meant nothing in a new country. Isabella Santos, now 17 and a senior at the local high school, understood sacrifice without knowing its full scope. She knew her mother worked long hours to support their small family, but Maria had never revealed the prestigious career she'd abandoned. Instead, Isabella saw a woman who attended parent-teacher conferences in cleaning uniforms, who saved every dollar for college tuition, who took night classes to improve her English while claiming it was just for personal growth. The irony wasn't lost on Maria that she cleaned the very halls where her daughter dreamed of one day walking as a doctor. Every morning, as Maria moved through the hospital's specialized units, she absorbed more than dust and debris. In the ICU, she learned medical terminology by listening to nurses like Sarah Chun discuss patient conditions. Sarah was one of the few staff members who actually acknowledged Maria's presence with genuine smiles and occasional small talk. But even Sarah had no idea that the quiet cleaner understood every complex medical conversation happening around her. Dr. Richard Hawthorne, the hospital's chief of surgery, represented the pinnacle of the invisible barrier between Maria and the medical world. A man accustomed to immediate respect and deference, Dr. Hawthorne moved through the hospital like visiting royalty. When he encountered Maria in the hallways, which wasn't often given his tendency to look past service staff entirely, he might offer a perfunctory nod. If he was feeling particularly magnanimous, the hospital's crown jewel was its life flight program. Operated from a helipad on the roof where 2 medical helicopters stood ready for emergency calls. Maria had observed these operations with the trained eye of someone who understood every aspect of what she was witnessing. She knew the aircraft specifications, recognized the complex weather patterns that determined mission feasibility, and understood the split-second timing that made the difference between successful rescues and tragedies. Captain Tom Bradley, the senior life flight pilot, was a former military aviator who had transitioned to civilian medical transport after completing his service. Respected throughout the hospital for his skill and professionalism, Tom embodied everything Maria had once been, but could no longer claim to be. She had cleaned the pilot briefing rooms where Tom studied weather reports and mission parameters, had emptied trash from the crew quarters where pilots discussed the technical challenges of their work, and had silently absorbed conversations about flight operations that most people would find incomprehensible. What none of them could know was that Maria understood their world from the inside out. She recognized the subtle stress patterns in radio communications that indicated deteriorating flight conditions. She could read weather radar displays as easily as most people read newspapers. Her military experience had included extensive medical evacuation training, and she understood the critical timing factors that determined whether emergency patients lived or died. The approaching winter brought increasingly unpredictable weather patterns to their region, creating new challenges for the life flight operations that Maria observed with growing concern. She noticed the tension in the flight crews as they dealt with more frequent mission cancellations, saw the frustration in medical staff faces when critical patients couldn't be transported due to weather conditions, and understood the life and death implications of grounded aircraft better than anyone else in the building. November 15th dawned gray and foreboding, with a light drizzle that seemed innocuous but carried the atmospheric pressure signatures that Maria's trained instincts recognized as potentially dangerous. As she began her morning rounds, collecting cleaning supplies from the storage closet and methodically working through her assigned floors, the hospital hummed with its usual pre-dawn energy. Night shift workers prepared to hand over responsibilities to incoming day staff, unaware that this seemingly ordinary morning would soon test every protocol and assumption they held about emergency medical care. Maria was on the third floor, working her way through the administrative offices, when urgent radio chatter began crackling from the emergency dispatch center. The partially open door allowed voices to carry into the hallway, and her military-trained ear immediately caught the tonal shift that indicated a routine situation escalating toward crisis. Multiple casualty incident, Highway 47, approximately 30 miles northeast, came the dispatcher's clipped report. Initial reports indicate jackknifed semi-trailer causing chain reaction collision. 6 vehicles involved, at least 3 critical casualties requiring Level 1 trauma center transport. Weather conditions deteriorating in incident area. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, the emergency department director, had responded to the emergency call with characteristic speed and efficiency. Despite being awakened at home less than 30 minutes earlier, she now stood in the dispatch center coordinating the hospital's response with the calm authority that had made her one of the most respected emergency physicians in the region. As incoming reports painted an increasingly serious picture of the highway accident, she began activating the complex protocols that would mobilize every resource necessary to save lives. Activate both life flight aircraft immediately. Dr. Rodriguez instructed her team. Get Captain Bradley and his crew moving for primary transport. I want the trauma bay prepared for multiple critical patients, and call in additional surgical staff. This is going to be a complex operation. The familiar announcement echoed through the hospital corridors. Life flight activation, life flight activation. All crew members report to helipad immediately. For Maria, continuing her cleaning duties while monitoring the developing situation. These words carried deeper meaning than they held for most hospital employees. She understood the intricacies of helicopter operations in challenging weather, knew the risks involved in medical transport missions, and recognized the narrow margins that separated successful rescues from disasters. Captain Bradley received the emergency call while reviewing weather reports in the pilot's lounge. his morning coffee growing cold as he studied meteorological data that painted an increasingly concerning picture. At 52, with over 8,000 flight hours accumulated between military service and medical transport operations, Bradley had developed the instinctive ability to read weather patterns that separated experienced pilots from merely competent ones. What he saw in the current conditions triggered the kind of professional concern that came from years of making life-and-death decisions based on atmospheric data. Jake Morrison, Bradley's co-pilot, was newer to the life flight program but brought enthusiasm and solid technical skills to their partnership. As they rapidly prepared for launch, both pilots could see the deteriorating conditions outside: wind picking up strength, clouds lowering steadily, and precipitation that was transitioning from light drizzle to more substantial rain. "This weather's going to be challenging," Bradley observed as they completed their pre-flight preparations. "We'll need to make some tough decisions about safety margins once we assess conditions at the accident scene." Life Flight 1 lifted off from St. Catharines helipad at 6:23 a.m., carrying Captain Bradley at the controls, along with Dr. Michael Patterson and 2 flight nurses specifically trained for trauma response. The aircraft carried hope for the critically injured patients waiting at the accident scene, but it also carried the weight of responsibility that came with operating sophisticated equipment in increasingly marginal conditions from her 3rd floor window. Maria watched the helicopter disappear into the gray morning sky with the analytical eye of someone who understood exactly what the crew was facing. The weather patterns visible from her vantage point, increasing wind turbulence evidenced by movement in the bare tree branches, steadily lowering cloud ceiling, and the particular quality of precipitation that indicated a larger storm system moving through, told her that conditions were approaching the limits of safe flight operations. 23 minutes after departure, the radio in the dispatch center crackled with Captain Bradley's voice, carrying a controlled tension that immediately commanded attention throughout the emergency response team. "St. Catharines Dispatch, Life Flight 1 has reached the accident scene and established visual contact with casualties. We have multiple critical patients requiring immediate transport, but we're encountering significant operational challenges." Dr. Rodriguez grabbed the radio microphone with the quick reflexes of someone accustomed to managing complex emergency situations. "Life Flight 1, this is Dr. Rodriguez. Report your status and conditions. Weather has deteriorated substantially since departure." Bradley's voice came back, professional but clearly strained. "Current conditions show sustained winds 35 knots with gusts to 45. Cloud ceiling dropped to approximately 800 feet and continuing to lower. Visibility less than 1 mile and decreasing. We can complete 1 transport mission safely, but conditions are approaching limits for additional flights." The implications hit the emergency team like a physical blow. Multiple critical patients required immediate helicopter transport to survive. But the weather system that made their injuries so time-critical was the same system that was making rescue operations increasingly impossible. "What's the prognosis for Life Flight 2 launch capability?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, though she could already sense the answer from Bradley's tone. "Negative for safe operations," came the immediate response. "Weather system is moving in rapidly from northwest. By the time Life Flight 2 could reach the scene, conditions will be well below minimum safe parameters for civilian medical transport operations. We're looking at a closing window here." The dispatch center fell silent except for the steady drumming of rain against windows that seemed to emphasize the impossible situation developing outside. Dr. Rodriguez found herself staring at faces of experienced emergency professionals who had handled countless crises, but were now confronting the harsh reality that sometimes weather and circumstances conspired to make the impossible truly impossible. Maria Santos, still maintaining her cleaning duties, but absorbing every word of the unfolding crisis, felt her pulse quickening as her mind automatically began processing the flight conditions being described. Her military training had included extensive operations in weather that would ground civilian aircraft, and she understood the precise calculations involved in determining when acceptable risk crossed the line into reckless endangerment. More troubling, she recognized that the weather pattern described matched conditions she had successfully navigated during her service, using techniques and approaches that weren't part of civilian flight training. St. Catherine's Dispatch, this is Incident Command at the accident scene, came a new voice over the radio, carrying the desperate edge of emergency responders watching people die while being unable to help them. We have 2 additional critical patients here who will not survive ground transport. The distance and severity of their injuries make helicopter transport their only chance of survival. Is there any possibility of additional aircraft availability? Dr. Rodriguez felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. She was being asked to authorize operations that violated every safety protocol she'd been trained to follow. But she was also facing the reality that 2 families were about to lose loved ones who might be saved if someone was willing to take extraordinary risks. Jake Morrison, monitoring weather data from multiple sources, delivered additional sobering information over the aircraft's communication system. Tom, Weather Service is now forecasting sustained winds 40 to 50 knots, with severe turbulence warnings. They're recommending against all non-essential aviation operations in our area. As Life Flight 1 loaded their first critical patient, 24-year-old Jennifer Walsh, an elementary school teacher whose morning commute had ended in twisted metal and life-threatening injuries, the full scope of the developing crisis became clear to everyone involved. 3 people needed immediate helicopter transport to survive. But the conditions that made their rescue so desperately necessary were the same conditions that made additional rescue attempts impossible using standard safety protocols. The return flight to St. Catherine's became a masterclass in pilot skill and experience, as Captain Bradley navigated through conditions that tested every limit of aircraft performance and human capability. Fighting wind gusts that buffeted the helicopter unpredictably, flying through rain that reduced visibility to mere hundreds of feet, Bradley demonstrated why he was considered one of the region's most skilled medical transport pilots. Patient showing signs of severe internal bleeding. Dr. Patterson reported from the cabin where he worked to stabilize Jennifer Walsh. Blood pressure declining despite aggressive intervention. We need surgical capability immediately upon landing. Understood, Bradley responded, his voice calm despite the aircraft's violent motion through turbulent air. ETA 8 minutes. Requesting priority approach clearance. Maria watched from her window position as the helicopter fought its way back through increasingly hostile skies, her trained eye reading the aircraft's struggling flight path and recognizing the exceptional skill required to maintain controlled flight in such conditions. When Life Flight 1 finally touched down on the hospital's helipad, the landing was accomplished with a precision that spoke to Bradley's exceptional abilities, but also demonstrated just how challenging the conditions had become. The transfer of Jennifer Walsh to the emergency department proceeded with remarkable efficiency, but everyone involved understood that the successful rescue had exhausted their conventional options. 2 more patients remained at the accident scene, facing certain death without helicopter transport, while weather conditions continued deteriorating beyond any reasonable hope of additional flights. Captain Bradley emerged from post-flight procedures, with Jake Morrison, both pilots carrying the weight of professional responsibility and personal frustration. They had completed 1 successful mission, but their assessment of current conditions left no room for optimism about additional rescue attempts. Weather has progressed beyond anything we can safely manage, Bradley reported to Dr. Rodriguez directly. Wind speeds are now consistently above our operational limits, and visibility has deteriorated to the point where terrain clearance through mountain passes would be impossible. Attempting another flight would risk additional lives without realistic hope of success. Jake Morrison, checking with regional air traffic control and other emergency services, confirmed that the decision wasn't unique to their operation. 3 other life flight services in the region have grounded aircraft due to conditions. National Weather Service has issued specific warnings against aviation operations in our area. The emergency responders at the accident scene continued, providing updates that painted an increasingly desperate picture. David Chun, a 37-year-old construction worker, was showing signs of progressive spinal cord injury that would result in permanent paralysis or death without immediate surgical intervention. Margaret Thompson, a 62-year-old grandmother on her way to visit her new grandbaby, had suffered severe head trauma with increasing intracranial pressure that indicated life-threatening brain hemorrhage. Dr. Rodriguez found herself staring at weather radar displays, searching for any indication that conditions might improve enough to allow another flight attempt. The massive storm system showed no signs of weakening, and meteorologists were predicting severe weather would persist for hours beyond the survival window for the patient still trapped at the accident scene. Dr. Rodriguez came another transmission from the incident commander, stress unmistakable in his voice. Male patient is showing decreased sensation and motor function. Female patient's Glasgow Coma scale is dropping rapidly. Without helicopter transport, we're facing 2 additional fatalities. The brutal reality of the situation crystallized around a simple truth. 2 people were going to die because the skills needed to save them weren't available within the constraints of standard operating procedures and regulatory limitations. Captain Bradley, drawing on his military experience and extensive knowledge of helicopter operations, had explored every possible conventional solution without finding an acceptable approach. There is one theoretical possibility, Bradley said slowly, spreading a topographical chart across the dispatch center table. A flight path exists that follows valley floors to stay below the cloud ceiling, but it would require flying at extremely low altitude through terrain we normally avoid entirely. The margin for error would be essentially 0. Dr. Rodriguez studied the proposed route with growing understanding of why Bradley's tone carried such reluctance. Are you saying this approach might be possible? I'm saying it might be theoretically possible for a pilot with extensive low-altitude tactical flight experience, Bradley clarified carefully. But the skill level required goes far beyond standard civilian medical transport qualifications. We're talking about military special operations flying, not emergency medical services. Maria Santos, who had been methodically cleaning nearby areas while absorbing every detail of the conversation, felt her heart begin racing as she realized the pilots were describing exactly the type of mission profile she had flown regularly during her military service. The low-altitude navigation through hostile terrain, precision flying in marginal weather conditions, and the ability to read atmospheric patterns that could transform dangerous situations into deadly ones. These were capabilities that had been drilled into her through years of specialized training and real-world combat missions. Her mind automatically began plotting the flight path Bradley had outlined, visualizing terrain features and calculating approach angles that would allow safe navigation through the valley system while maintaining adequate altitude for emergency procedures if mechanical problems developed. She understood the wind patterns that created downdrafts near certain ridgelines, and she knew the atmospheric conditions that would allow a skilled pilot to find stable air currents even in severe weather. But revealing her capabilities would mean exposing everything about her background that she had worked 3 years to keep carefully hidden. It would mean explaining why a qualified military pilot was working as a hospital cleaner, potentially triggering immigration investigations that could threaten Isabella's future, and placing herself in a position where failure could result in multiple deaths, including her own. Dr. James Mitchell, The hospital's chief medical officer arrived after being notified of the developing crisis. A physician with 30 years of emergency medicine experience before transitioning to administration. Dr. Mitchell understood both the medical urgency of the situation and the legal complexities of authorizing operations that violated established safety protocols. "Captain Bradley," Dr. Mitchell said after being briefed on the situation, "I need your professional assessment. Could you and your crew attempt this valley route approach with reasonable expectation of success?" Bradley's response was immediate and unequivocal. "No, sir. The skill level required for this type of mission exceeds our training and experience. We're competent pilots, but what's being discussed requires specialized capabilities that neither Jake nor I possess. Attempting this flight with our current qualifications would risk additional lives without realistic chance of success." The honest assessment hung in the air like a final verdict on any hope of saving the remaining patients. These weren't pilots lacking courage or commitment. They were professionals who understood their limitations and refused to let desperation override sound judgment. Maria felt tears forming as she listened to increasingly desperate radio updates from the accident scene. Emergency medical technicians were running out of options for stabilizing their patients, and the window for successful intervention was closing with each passing minute. She thought about Isabella, about the quiet life they had built together, about the security that came from remaining invisible in a world that didn't always welcome immigrants with complicated backgrounds. But she also thought about David Chun, who was approximately the same age as many soldiers she had evacuated from combat zones, and Margaret Thompson, who reminded her of her own mother back in Colombia. These were real people with families who loved them, with futures that depended on someone being willing to take extraordinary risks to give them a chance at survival. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The internal struggle Maria faced was between the safety she had worked so hard to create and the knowledge that her unique skills could make the difference between life and death for two strangers. Everything she had built in America, the stable job, the quiet anonymity, Isabella's educational opportunities, could be jeopardized by stepping forward. But her military training had instilled values that went beyond personal security. When you possess the ability to save lives, you have a moral obligation to act. Standing in the hospital corridor with her mop forgotten, listening to the increasingly desperate radio communications from the accident scene, Maria Santos reached the moment when she would have to choose between the security of invisibility and the moral imperative to act. When she was the only person available with the skills necessary to save lives, the decision arrived with the stark finality that characterizes medical emergencies when all conventional options have been exhausted. Maria Santos stood in the corridor outside the dispatch center, her cleaning cart abandoned, as she listened to radio communications that would force her to choose between personal safety and moral obligation. St. Catherine's Dispatch, this is Paramedic Johnson at the accident scene, came the transmission that carried the weight of imminent tragedy. Male patient has lost sensation below the neck and is showing signs of neurogenic shock. Female patient is unresponsive with fixed, dilated pupils. Without immediate surgical intervention, both patients will be deceased within 30 minutes. Dr. Rodriguez gripped the radio microphone, her medical training conflicting with the reality that sometimes medicine's capabilities were limited by factors beyond human control. Paramedic Johnson understood. Continue all supportive measures. Captain Bradley and Jake Morrison stood nearby, their expressions reflecting the professional frustration of pilots who understood exactly what needed to be accomplished, but lacked the specialized skills required to complete the mission safely. The valley route remained theoretically possible, but it demanded precision flying techniques that exceeded civilian aviation training. Maria set down her mop, walked directly into the dispatch center, and spoke words that would shatter the protective invisibility she had maintained for 3 years. "Excuse me, Dr. Rodriguez. I believe I can help with your situation." Everyone in the room turned toward the hospital cleaner who had just interrupted their emergency consultation. Dr. Rodriguez's initial expression showed surprise and mild irritation, but something in Maria's tone suggested this wasn't a casual comment from a well-meaning employee. "Maria, we appreciate your concern, but we're dealing with very complex aviation issues here," Dr. Rodriguez began diplomatically. "I understand exactly what you're dealing with," Maria replied, her voice carrying quiet authority that seemed completely at odds with her custodial uniform. "You need a pilot who can complete the valley route in current weather conditions. I can fly that mission." The silence that followed was filled with confusion and disbelief. Captain Bradley spoke first, his tone reflecting professional skepticism, mixed with curiosity. "Ma'am, what we're discussing requires very specialized helicopter flying skills. The conditions we're facing. I flew medical evacuations for 12 years with the Colombian Air Force." Maria interrupted, her military bearing becoming evident as she straightened and spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard during life-and-death situations. "Major Maria Elena Santos, retired. Over 3,000 hours mountain flying experience, including combat medical evacuations in weather conditions significantly worse than what you're experiencing today." Dr. Rodriguez stared at Maria with complete astonishment. "You're a helicopter pilot?" "I was a helicopter pilot," Maria corrected. "I specialized in medical evacuations and special operations missions in mountain terrain. I've completed missions through valleys in zero visibility, landed on mountain peaks during severe weather, and navigated through conditions that ground most civilian aircraft." Captain Bradley's skepticism began shifting toward professional interest as he processed the implications of Maria's claims. "You have specific experience with medical helicopter operations?" "I commanded a medical evacuation squadron for 4 years," Maria replied. "Every type of emergency medical mission you could imagine, including several similar to today's situation. The terrain between here and the accident scene is challenging, but manageable for someone with appropriate training and experience." "Jake." Morrison found his voice. "But why are you working as a hospital cleaner if you're a qualified helicopter pilot?" Maria's expression reflected the complicated realities of immigration and credential recognition. "My military qualifications are Colombian, and converting them to U.S. civilian certifications is complex and expensive. I needed immediate employment to support my daughter, so I accepted available work. But my flight skills haven't disappeared because I've been cleaning floors for 3 years." Dr. Rodriguez struggled to process this revelation while calculating whether it offered a realistic solution to their crisis. "Even if you have the experience you claim, you're not currently certified for U.S. airspace operations. The legal implications, Doctor." Maria interrupted with quiet intensity. "2 people are dying because no one else has the skills to reach them. I understand the legal complications, but those patients don't have time for bureaucratic procedures. The question is whether you're willing to let me try to save their lives." The room fell silent except for rain against windows and occasional radio communications from the accident scene. Everyone present understood they were facing a decision that transcended standard medical protocols and emergency procedures. Captain Bradley, drawing on his military background, asked the critical question. "Maria, assuming you have the capabilities you describe, what makes you believe you can succeed where we cannot?" Maria moved to the topographical chart Bradley had spread across the table and began tracing flight paths with the confidence of someone who had studied similar terrain professionally for years. "You're approaching this like civilian medical transport, trying to maintain standard safety margins and conventional procedures. This mission requires military tactical flying techniques." She pointed to specific map features as she continued. "The key is using terrain to your advantage instead of fighting it. Updrafts along the eastern ridgeline provide lift even in severe weather, and natural wind shadows in this valley section create corridors of relatively stable air. You fly low, enough to stay below turbulence, but high enough to maintain auto-rotation capability for emergency situations. Her finger traced the complex route with precision that demonstrated intimate knowledge of terrain flying principles. The critical passage here requires flying 200 feet above the valley floor using natural wind patterns. Standard approaches would need 1,500 feet minimum, impossible with current cloud ceiling at 600 feet. But tactical terrain flying techniques make controlled flight possible even in severe weather. Captain Bradley studied the route Maria described, his military aviation background allowing him to understand the concepts she was explaining. That's combat helicopter flying. Special operations techniques. Exactly, Maria confirmed. Not civilian emergency medical services. Military special operations adapted for medical evacuation. Same aircraft capabilities, completely different techniques. Dr. Rodriguez found herself caught between hope and disbelief. Maria, even accepting that you have these skills, we have no way to verify your qualifications. We'd be risking not just patient lives, but your life and our medical crew. Doctor, Maria replied with quiet determination, I've listened to radio communications for the past hour. Those patients will die without intervention. I can reach them. The question is whether you're willing to trust me with the opportunity. Jake Morrison, studying Maria's proposed flight path, raised a practical concern. Even if you have the flying skills, you're unfamiliar with our specific aircraft. These helicopters have particular performance characteristics and emergency procedures. Maria's response revealed the depth of her aviation knowledge. Life Flight 2 on the helipad is a Bell 429 twin-engine, IFR-capable medical transport helicopter. I've flown 412 and 407 models extensively. The 429 represents an evolution of the same design philosophy with more sophisticated avionics, but similar fundamental flight characteristics. Bradley's eyebrows rose. You can identify aircraft specifications from this distance. Aircraft identification. From silhouettes, engine sounds, and rotor configurations is standard military aviation training. Maria replied matter-of-factly. Your 429 has maximum gross weight 7,000 pounds, service ceiling 20,000 feet, range approximately 400 nautical miles. More importantly for this mission, excellent auto-rotation characteristics and controlled flight capability in wind conditions, up to 45 knots. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward with administrative concerns. Maria, what you're proposing is flying a medical helicopter without current U.S. certification. The legal ramifications. I'm proposing to save 2 lives using skills I've maintained, even while not flying professionally, Maria answered. I understand the risks, but those patients have no other options. Sometimes doing what's right requires accepting personal consequences. The radio crackled with another update from the accident scene. Desperation unmistakable in the paramedics. Voice: St. Catherine's Dispatch. Female patient's blood pressure is dropping rapidly with signs of cerebral herniation. If we don't get surgical intervention within 20 minutes, she won't survive. Dr. Rodriguez looked around at faces reflecting the same impossible dilemma she confronted. Every person present had dedicated their career to saving lives. But they faced a situation where the only potential solution involved breaking protocols and taking risks that could result in multiple casualties. Maria, Dr. Rodriguez said slowly, what would you need from us? Captain Bradley's orientation on aircraft-specific avionics and emergency procedures, Maria replied. A medical crew who understands this will be unlike any civilian medical transport they've experienced. And everyone needs to understand that while I believe I can complete this mission successfully, aviation never offers guarantees, especially in conditions like these. Captain Bradley found himself evaluating the flying credentials of a hospital cleaner who claimed extensive military pilot experience. Maria, what you're describing requires not just technical skills, but judgment and decision-making that comes from extensive high-risk experience. Tom, Maria said, using his first name with the familiarity of one pilot addressing another, I've flown medical evacuations in Colombian mountains during active combat. I've landed helicopters on mountain peaks in snowstorms to evacuate wounded soldiers. I've navigated through weather that would ground civilian aircraft and brought crews home safely from missions everyone said were impossible. She paused, her expression reflecting memories from another life. I didn't choose to stop flying. Circumstances forced temporary changes. But I never stopped being a pilot, never stopped thinking like a pilot, and never stopped believing that sometimes saving lives requires risking everything. Dr. Rodriguez felt the weight of command decision-making. She was being asked to authorize a mission that violated every protocol, involved an uncertified pilot, and carried enormous risks. But she also faced 2 patients who would die without intervention, and possibly the only person available with skills to save them. Captain Bradley, she said, based on what Maria has told us, do you believe she might be capable of completing this mission? Bradley studied Maria's face with the analytical eye of someone who had spent years evaluating pilots. Doctor, everything she said about aircraft specifications, flight techniques, and mission planning is accurate and detailed. Her knowledge of tactical procedures is consistent with advanced military training. But I've never evaluated pilot qualifications based on a hospital corridor conversation. He paused thoughtfully. What I can say is that if Maria is telling the truth about her background and experience, she might be the only person available who could successfully complete this mission. Jake Morrison raised another consideration. Someone needs to decide which medical crew would participate. The flight conditions Maria's describing will be unlike anything our medical staff has experienced. Dr. Rodriguez realized they were approaching the point where continued discussion would become academic without decisive action. Patients at the accident scene were running out of time, and every minute spent in debate reduced their chances of survival. Maria, she said, I need complete honesty. Are you confident you can safely complete this mission and bring our crew home? Maria's response carried the weight of someone who had made similar calculations many times. Doctor, I can't guarantee success. No pilot can in conditions like these. What I guarantee is that I have the skills and experience to give those patients their best chance at survival. I believe I can complete this mission safely, but aviation always involves calculated risks. The room fell silent as everyone processed the magnitude of their decision. They were being asked to trust lives to a woman who had been invisible to most of them just hours earlier, based on claims that seemed almost impossible to believe. But they also confronted the reality that conventional approaches had failed, that 2 people were dying, and that extraordinary situations sometimes required extraordinary solutions. Dr. Rodriguez made the decision that would define her career. Maria, I'm authorizing this mission. Captain Bradley, provide whatever aircraft briefing Maria needs. Dr. Patterson, assemble a medical crew who understands this will be an extraordinary flight. The room burst into coordinated activity as everyone began preparing for a mission none had ever imagined. Captain Bradley and Maria headed toward the helipad for aircraft orientation, while Dr. Rodriguez coordinated with medical staff to select crew members willing to participate in such high-risk operations. I'll go, Dr. Patterson said immediately. I've flown hundreds of life flight missions, and I understand the medical urgency. If Maria can get us there safely, I can stabilize those patients. Nurse Sarah Chun, who had listened with growing admiration for Maria's courage, stepped forward. I want to be part of this mission. I've worked trauma for 8 years, and I'm not afraid of taking risks when lives depend on it. Flight Nurse Rebecca Martinez, despite having just completed the harrowing first mission, volunteered again. I know what those patients are facing and what their families are experiencing. If there's a chance to save them, I want to help. As the medical crew prepared equipment and supplies, Maria and Captain Bradley reached Life Flight 2 on the helipad. The Bell 429 sat in the rain, its profile reflecting both the sophistication of modern medical aviation and the urgency of the situation. Maria approached with the confident stride of someone who had spent years working around helicopters, her trained eye automatically assessing condition and configuration. Beautiful aircraft, Maria observed, beginning her pre-flight inspection. Excellent choice for medical transport. The cabin space is ideal for patient care, and twin-engine reliability is crucial for missions like this. Bradley watched in amazement as Maria conducted a thorough inspection with systematic precision that reflected years of training and experience. She checked rotor blades for damage, verified fuel quantity, tested control surfaces, and examined landing gear with methodical approaches that spoke to deep professional knowledge. Maria, watching you work around this aircraft, you clearly know what you're doing, Bradley acknowledged. Your inspection is more thorough than most pilots I've worked with. Military aviation teaches that pre-flight inspection can mean the difference between mission completion and not coming home, Maria replied while checking emergency equipment. When flying into hostile territory or severe weather, you can't afford equipment failures that proper inspection could have prevented. As Maria familiarized herself with avionics and control systems, Bradley provided briefings on specific procedures and characteristics of the Bell 429. The helicopter's glass cockpit display was more sophisticated than Maria's Colombian experience. But fundamental helicopter flight principles remained constant. Weather radar integrates into the primary flight display, Bradley explained. You can overlay meteorological information directly onto navigation displays, which should help identify severe turbulence and precipitation intensity areas. Maria studied the weather radar with analytical eyes trained by years of interpreting meteorological data for flight planning. The storm system is massive, but I can see corridors of lighter precipitation that should provide flyable conditions. Timing our approach to take advantage of temporary breaks in weather intensity will be critical. As they completed aircraft briefing, both pilots understood they were preparing for a mission that would test every skill and experience Maria had accumulated. Weather conditions were at the edge of survivability. Terrain was challenging. Margin for error was essentially zero, but they also understood that 2 people were dying, and sometimes saving lives required risking everything on missions that others would consider impossible. The final preparations took on the organized intensity of a military operation as, quote, Maria Santos prepared to risk everything she had built in America for the chance to save 2 strangers. The medical crew had assembled equipment and supplies, understanding they were about to embark on a flight unlike any they had experienced. The weight of the decision settled on everyone involved as they realized that within minutes, they would be trusting their lives to a woman who had been invisible to most of them just hours earlier. Dr. Rodriguez stood on the helipad, rain-soaking, through her scrubs as she watched Maria complete final aircraft systems checks. The transformation from hospital cleaner to helicopter pilot was so complete it seemed almost surreal. Maria moved around the aircraft with confidence and precision that spoke to years of similar situations, every action reflecting deep knowledge from extensive training and real-world experience. Maria, Dr. Rodriguez called over the sound of rain and wind. One final time, are you absolutely certain about this? Maria paused in her checklist and looked directly at Dr. Rodriguez. Doctor, I've spent 3 years cleaning these halls, listening to conversations, watching the dedication of everyone who works here. I've seen how hard you fight to save lives, and I've witnessed the pain when you can't. Today, I can use my skills to save 2 people who will die without intervention. Yes, I'm certain. The medical crew, Dr. Patterson, Nurse Sarah Chun, and Flight Nurse Rebecca Martinez, approached with equipment bags and supplies. Despite extraordinary circumstances, their preparation remained meticulous and professional. They understood that once airborne, mission success would depend not only on Maria's flying skills, but also on their ability to provide critical medical care under extremely challenging conditions. "What should we expect during the flight?" Dr. Patterson asked as he loaded medical equipment. "What kind of conditions will we encounter?" "It will be rough," Maria replied honestly. "Low-level flight through mountain valleys in severe weather. Significant turbulence, sudden altitude changes, moments where the aircraft will be pushed to its limits. You need to be secured and prepared for flight conditions more intense than civilian medical transport." Nurse Sarah Chun, experienced with life flight operations, asked the question on everyone's mind. "What are our chances of success?" Maria's response reflected honest assessment without false confidence. "If I didn't believe we could succeed, I wouldn't suggest this mission. But I can't guarantee success. No pilot can in conditions like these. What I promise is to use every skill and experience I have to bring us all home safely." Captain Bradley remained on the helipad to assist with preparation, approaching Maria with final weather updates. "You'll have approximately a 15-minute window of slightly improved conditions starting in 10 minutes. If you're attempting this mission, that's your optimal opportunity." "Understood," Maria replied, her military training evident in crisp acknowledgement. "We'll be ready for immediate launch when the window opens." As the medical crew completed preparations and secured equipment, Maria conducted final cockpit checks with systematic precision drilled through years of military training. She tested flight controls, verified navigation systems, and confirmed all emergency equipment was properly positioned and accessible. The radio crackled with another update. From the accident scene, desperation unmistakable in the paramedic's voice. St. Catherine's dispatch, "We're losing both patients. Male patient showing neurogenic shock. Female patient completely unresponsive. Is helicopter transport still possible? Or should we begin end-of-life protocols?" Dr. Rodriguez grabbed the microphone, her voice carrying determination that surprised even her. "Paramedic Johnson, Life Flight 2 is preparing for emergency launch with medical crew. 8A, approximately 25 minutes. Continue aggressive supportive care. Help is coming." The silence that followed carried the weight of a promise everyone hoped could be kept. Paramedics at the accident scene had been fighting to keep patients alive for over 2 hours, watching helplessly as conditions deteriorated while conventional help remained grounded. Maria completed final checks and signaled the medical crew to board. As Dr. Patterson, Nurse Chun, and Flight Nurse Martinez secured themselves in the cabin, Maria settled into the pilot's seat with focused concentration of someone preparing for the most important flight of her life. "Everyone ready?" Maria asked over the internal communication system. "Medical crew ready," Dr. Patterson confirmed. "Pre-flight complete, all systems normal," Maria announced. "Starting engines and beginning launch sequence." The Bell 429's twin engines spun up with the distinctive whine of turbine power plants coming online. Maria's hands moved across controls with automatic precision of thousands of repetitions, but her mind focused on unique challenges awaiting them beyond the hospital's helipad safety. St. Catherine's dispatch, Life Flight 2 requesting clearance for emergency medical transport, Maria announced, her voice carrying professional authority. "Life Flight 2, cleared for immediate departure," came the response. Weather conditions remain marginal with winds gusting to 40 knots. Exercise extreme caution. As the helicopter lifted from the helipad, Maria felt the familiar sensation that had defined so much of her life. The aircraft responded to her inputs with expected precision, but she immediately felt challenging weather conditions that would test every skill developed over her flying career. The Bell 429 climbed into gray sky, rotor blades cutting through. Rain and wind as Maria began the most dangerous flight of her life. Below, the hospital grew smaller as they headed toward mountain valleys where 2 people lay dying, their survival dependent on skills of a woman who had been dismissed and overlooked by almost everyone who encountered her. Maria Santos was no longer invisible. She was a pilot on a mission, carrying hopes and trust of everyone who had chosen to believe in her when belief seemed impossible. The next 25 minutes would determine whether that trust was justified, and whether courage to risk everything for strangers would be rewarded with lives saved. Against impossible odds, the first minutes of flight revealed the true magnitude of Maria's challenge. As Life Flight 2 climbed away from St. Catharines, the helicopter encountered wind conditions that immediately tested both aircraft capabilities and Maria's piloting skills. The Bell 429 shuddered and bucked, fighting through turbulence that would have forced most civilian pilots to return, but Maria's military training had prepared her for exactly these conditions. "Flight conditions as expected," Maria announced calmly despite violent aircraft motion. "Significant turbulence for several minutes as we transition to low-level flight path. Stay secured and prepare for sudden altitude changes." Dr. Patterson, despite dozens of life flight experiences, had never encountered anything like current conditions. The helicopter's cabin pitched and rolled unpredictably, and he could feel the aircraft fighting wind forces determined to push them off course. "Is this normal for these conditions?" "Exactly what I expected," Maria replied, hands making constant control adjustments navigating turbulent air. Mountain weather creates downdrafts and wind shear that challenge aircraft, but we're performing well within design parameters, dropping to lower altitude where air should be more stable. As the helicopter descended toward the valley floor, Maria's tactical flying skills became evident. She wasn't simply flying through weather. She was using understanding of mountain aerodynamics and atmospheric conditions to find stable air pockets allowing controlled flight. Her approach was methodical and precise, utilizing techniques never taught in civilian programs. "Terrain features match our flight plan," Maria announced, beginning navigation through the valley system leading to the accident scene. Following eastern ridgeline to take advantage of updrafts, maintaining altitude that keeps us below worst turbulence. Nurse Sarah Chun, monitoring medical equipment, asked what everyone was thinking. "How can you navigate so precisely in these conditions?" "With almost zero visibility. Military training teaches instrument and terrain recognition flying even without clear sight," Maria explained while making subtle course adjustments. Using GPS navigation, terrain following radar, and understanding of airflow through mountain valleys, key is staying oriented to terrain features and knowing where safe corridors exist. As they progressed through the valley system, weather conditions seemed to intensify rather than improve. Rain hammered the windscreen with increasing force, and wind gusts created constant controlled turbulence, requiring Maria's complete attention to manage safely. Passing through the most challenging section, Maria announced, approaching a narrow passage between ridgelines. "Terrain creates significant downdrafts here, but it's the fastest route to the accident scene. This will be rough." The helicopter dropped suddenly, encountering downdrafts that pushed the aircraft toward the valley floor with alarming force. Maria's response was immediate and precise, adjusting collective pitch and cyclic controls to compensate for changing aerodynamic conditions while maintaining forward progress through the dangerous corridor. Flight nurse Rebecca Martinez, despite extensive challenging transport experience, was amazed by Maria's ability to maintain controlled flight in seemingly impossible conditions. "I've never seen flying like this. How did you learn to handle such severe weather?" "Combat flying teaches accepting risks others would consider unacceptable," Maria replied, concentration never wavering. "Evacuating wounded soldiers from hostile Territory, you learn to fly in conditions that ground civilian aircraft. You find ways to complete missions when failure means people die. Approaching the accident scene, Maria began coordinating with ground emergency responders to establish a safe landing zone. Terrain around the highway was challenging, with power lines, trees, and uneven ground complicating helicopter landing attempts. "Ground units, Life Flight 2 approaching your location," Maria announced over emergency frequency. "Need you to establish landing zone at least 100 feet from accident site, clear of obstacles. Will require ground support for patient loading due to weather conditions." Response came immediately, filled with relief and amazement that a helicopter had reached them through severe weather. Life Flight 2, Incident Command. Landing zone prepared 200 feet south of accident site. Wind conditions gusting to 45 knots, with occasional stronger gusts. Maria assessed the landing zone from her approach perspective, experienced eyes evaluating wind patterns, terrain features, and potential hazards affecting safe landing. Conditions were at the absolute edge of survivable helicopter operations, but military training had prepared her for exactly these precision approaches. "Landing zone visual," Maria announced to her crew. "Approach will be challenging due to wind and terrain, but manageable. Prepare for landing, will be down in under 2 minutes." As Life Flight 2 began final approach to the accident scene, Maria Santos was no longer the invisible hospital cleaner overlooked by everyone around her. She was a pilot completing one of the most challenging missions of her career, using skills developed through years of training and experience to save lives of 2 strangers with no other hope. The helicopter's approach required every bit of Maria's skill as she navigated wind conditions, pushing the aircraft to operational limits. But her confidence never wavered, and determination to complete the mission carried her through the most dangerous flight phase. Minutes later, they would be on the ground, and the real test would begin: whether the medical crew could stabilize patients quickly enough for safe return flight through the same challenging conditions that had nearly prevented their rescue mission entirely. The landing at the accident scene demanded every skill Maria had accumulated over her flying career. As Life Flight 2 approached the makeshift landing zone, she could see devastation caused by the multi-vehicle collision, twisted metal, debris scattered across the highway, emergency vehicles with flashing lights in gray morning light. Wind conditions were more challenging than anticipated, with gusts threatening to push the helicopter off course during the most critical approach phase. "Final approach, everyone secured," Maria announced, fighting to maintain precise aircraft control. "Ground winds variable and gusty. This requires very controlled landing." The Bell 429 descended through turbulent air, with Maria making constant adjustments compensating for unpredictable wind patterns. Military training had prepared her for exactly these precision approaches, where error margins were measured in feet and seconds rather than comfortable civilian flying safety margins. "Outstanding approach," Dr. Patterson said, his voice reflecting both relief and admiration. "Never seen a pilot handle conditions like these." As the helicopter touched down on uneven ground, Maria quickly completed landing checklist while keeping engines running and rotor blades turning. "Keep this turnaround quick as possible," she announced to the medical crew. "Weather continuing to deteriorate, and we need these patients back to the hospital before our flight window closes." The medical crew immediately disembarked and rushed toward the accident scene, where paramedics had fought to keep David Chun and Margaret Thompson alive for over 3 hours. The scene was chaotic but organized, with emergency responders working systematically to prepare patients for helicopter transport. Dr. Patterson took charge of medical assessment upon reaching the patients. David Chun, the 37-year-old construction worker, was conscious but showing complete spinal cord injury below the neck. His condition was critical but stable, And Dr. Patterson quickly determined he could survive helicopter transport if they reached the hospital quickly. Margaret Thompson presented a more challenging situation. The 62-year-old grandmother was unconscious with severe brain injury that had progressed significantly since the accident. Her pupils were fixed and dilated, showing decerebrate posturing, indicating critical brain damage. Both patients need immediate loading, Dr. Patterson announced. Male patient has a chance if we get him to surgery within an hour. Female patient, extremely critical, but still possibility of meaningful recovery if we can relieve intracranial pressure. Patient loading was complicated by weather conditions and challenging terrain around the landing zone. Maria remained at helicopter controls, monitoring weather and maintaining readiness for immediate takeoff once patients were secured. How are flight conditions for return? Nurse Sarah Chun asked while helping secure David Chun on the stretcher. System continuing to deteriorate, but still have a flyable window, Maria replied, constantly scanning weather radar. Need to launch within 5 minutes to maintain safe return conditions. As the medical crew worked to stabilize both patients for transport, Maria coordinated with ground responders, ensuring the landing zone remained clear for takeoff. Wind conditions were becoming more severe, and she could see the weather system continuing to intensify. Both patients secured and ready, Dr. Patterson announced. Margaret Thompson critical, requires immediate neurosurgical intervention. David Chun stable but needs urgent spinal surgery. Medical crew secured for takeoff, Maria announced, beginning. Engine run-up procedures. Return flight will be more challenging than approach due to increased weight and deteriorating weather. Life Flight 2 lifted from the accident scene with precision and power, carrying 2 patients whose lives depended on Maria's ability to navigate through weather that had continued worsening during their brief ground time. The helicopter climbed away from the landing zone with additional patient and equipment weight, requiring careful aircraft performance management. Return flight initiated, Maria announced to St. Catherine's Dispatch. 2 critical patients aboard, beginning return. Flight path, ETA 30 minutes. The return flight through mountain valleys proved more challenging than the initial approach. The weather system had intensified, creating wind conditions and turbulence that pushed the helicopter to operational limits. Maria's flying skills were tested to maximum as she navigated terrain impossible for most civilian pilots to manage safely. Flight conditions severe but manageable, Maria announced to the medical crew. Encountering significant turbulence, but aircraft performing well. Continue patient care. We'll get them to the hospital. Dr. Patterson and the medical crew worked frantically maintaining both patient stability during the challenging flight. Turbulence made medical procedures extremely difficult, but training and experience allowed them to provide critical care under extraordinary conditions. David Chun stable, Dr. Patterson reported. Margaret Thompson showing some neurological response, which is encouraging. If we get her to surgery quickly, there's chance for meaningful recovery. As they approached St. Catherine's Medical Center, Maria could see the hospital's emergency response team preparing for arrival. The trauma bay was ready, surgical teams standing by, and the entire hospital had mobilized to receive patients they had fought so hard to rescue. St. Catherine's Dispatch, Life Flight 2 on final approach, Maria announced. 2 critical patients aboard, both requiring immediate surgical intervention. Request priority landing clearance. Life Flight 2. Cleared for immediate landing, came the response. Emergency team standing by for patient reception. The landing at St. Catherine's was performed with the same precision, characterizing every aspect of Maria's rescue mission. As Life Flight 2 touched down on the hospital's helipad, the emergency response team immediately activated with coordinated efficiency defining their profession. Patients on deck, Maria announced, completing landing checklist. Both critical patients ready for immediate trauma bay transport. Transfer of David Chen and Margaret Thompson from helicopter to emergency department happened with remarkable speed and efficiency. Dr. Patterson maintained medical control during transfer, providing continuous updates to surgical teams about conditions and treatments received during flight. David Chen, 37-year-old male with cervical spinal cord injury at C4-C5 level. Dr. Patterson reported to the trauma team. Complete loss of motor and sensory function below shoulders, but vitals stable. Needs immediate neurosurgical evaluation for possible decompression surgery. Margaret Thompson's transfer was even more urgent. Margaret Thompson, 62-year-old female with severe traumatic brain injury, Dr. Patterson continued. Unconscious at scene with increased intracranial pressure signs, but showed some neurological responses during flight. Needs immediate CT scan and possible emergency craniotomy. As medical teams rushed both patients into the hospital, Maria completed post-flight procedures with systematic thoroughness drilled through years of military training. The helicopter had performed flawlessly throughout the mission, but she needed to document any issues affecting future flight operations. Dr. Rodriguez, who had monitored the mission from dispatch, approached Maria as she finished securing the aircraft. "Maria, I don't know how to thank you for what you just accomplished. You saved 2 lives today under conditions impossible for anyone else." "That's what we do," Maria replied, her demeanor reflecting both exhaustion and satisfaction from successful mission completion. When people need help, you use whatever skills you have to provide it. Those patients needed a pilot who could handle extreme weather, and I happened to be available. Captain Bradley, who had monitored the flight from the ground, joined with obvious amazement. "Maria, I've flown for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. That flight should have been impossible in those weather conditions. You would have done the same with the training," Maria said with characteristic modesty. Military aviation teaches that sometimes impossible missions are the only ones worth flying. When lives are on the line, you find ways to accomplish things others might consider beyond safe or practical limits. The hours following Maria's successful rescue mission brought a whirlwind of activity that would forever change her life at St. Catherine's Medical Center. Word of the dramatic helicopter rescue had spread throughout the hospital with remarkable speed, and staff members who had barely noticed Maria during her 3 years as a cleaner were now seeking her out to express their amazement and gratitude. For her extraordinary actions, Maria Santos received a phone call at school that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her mother. Dr. Rodriguez, having obtained Isabella's contact information from Maria's employee file, felt the 17-year-old needed to be informed about the morning's events before hearing them from other sources. "Isabella, this is Dr. Rodriguez from St. Catherine's Medical Center where your mother works," the call began. "I need to let you know that your mother is safe and unharmed, but she's been involved in extraordinary circumstances today that you should know about." The honor student listened in complete bewilderment as Dr. Rodriguez explained that her mother, the woman who cleaned hospital floors and took evening English classes, had just piloted a medical helicopter through severe weather to save 2 people's lives. The revelation that Maria was actually a trained military pilot with over 3,000 hours of flight experience came as a complete shock to a daughter who thought she knew everything about her mother's background. "My mother is a pilot?" Isabella asked, her voice reflecting confusion and amazement. "She never told me she knew how to fly helicopters." "Your mother saved 2 lives today using skills none of us knew she possessed," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "She's a hero, and she's also someone who has apparently been hiding a very significant part of her background to protect your family's privacy and security." As Isabella struggled to absorb this life-changing information, Maria was dealing with immediate consequences of her decision to reveal her true capabilities. The Federal Aviation Administration had been notified about the unauthorized flight by an uncertified pilot. and representatives were already en route to investigate and determine what regulatory actions might be required. Dr. Patterson emerged from the emergency department with updates on both patients. His expression reflected cautious optimism of a physician who had just participated in saving lives under extraordinary circumstances. Both patients stable and responding to treatment. Dr. Patterson announced, David Chun is in surgery for spinal stabilization. The neurosurgeon believes there's good chance of preventing additional spinal cord damage, and even possibility of some functional recovery if surgery goes well. News about Margaret Thompson was even more encouraging. Margaret Thompson regained consciousness during initial evaluation, Dr. Patterson continued. CT scan shows subdural hematoma requiring surgical evacuation, but her neurological responses are much better than expected. The neurosurgeon is optimistic about chances for meaningful recovery. Relief and satisfaction filling the group around the helipad was palpable. Two people facing certain death just hours earlier were now receiving life-saving medical treatment because one person had been willing to risk everything to use skills others didn't know she possessed. The afternoon brought visitors to the hospital who wanted to meet the woman who had accomplished the impossible. David Chun's family arrived from across the state, having driven through the same severe weather that had made helicopter rescue necessary. His wife, Linda, and their two teenage children had been told David might not survive his injuries, and they were overwhelmed with gratitude for the woman who had risked her life to save him. Mrs. Santos, Linda Chun said through tears as she met Maria in the hospital corridor, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. The doctors say David has a chance to recover because you got him here in time. You saved my husband's life. Margaret Thompson's daughter, Jennifer Walsh, had flown in from Denver when she received word about her mother's accident. She had been told to prepare for the worst, but when she arrived at the hospital, she found her mother conscious and responsive, talking about her new grandbaby and making plans for recovery. I understand you're the pilot who saved my mother, Jennifer said when she found Maria in the hospital cafeteria. The doctors told me she wouldn't have survived without immediate helicopter transport. You gave our family a miracle today. These encounters with families of patients she had helped rescue brought home to Maria the real impact of her decision to reveal her capabilities and take extraordinary risks to save lives. These weren't abstract statistics or nameless casualties. They were real people with families who loved them, and her actions had prevented tragedies that would have devastated multiple families. Isabella arrived at the hospital that evening, having left school early to see her mother and try to understand how her world had been turned upside down in a single day. The conversation between mother and daughter took place in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, away from the attention and activity that had surrounded Maria throughout the day. Mama, why didn't you tell me you were a pilot? Isabella asked, her voice reflecting hurt and confusion along with pride and amazement. Why did you keep this secret from me? Maria's response reflected protective instincts that had guided her decisions since arriving in America. Mia, I wanted to protect you from complications that might affect your future. I wanted you to focus on your studies and dreams without worrying about your mother's past or legal issues that might arise from my military background. But you were a hero in Colombia too, weren't you? Isabella asked, beginning to understand the sacrifices her mother had made. You saved lives there. And then you came here and cleaned floors so I could have a better future. I did what I needed to do to provide for our family, Maria replied simply. Today I did what I needed to do to save lives when no one else could help. Both decisions were about using whatever capabilities I have to protect the people who matter most. The conversation between Maria and Isabella marked the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship, one based on complete honesty about Maria's background and capabilities. But it also marked the end of the quiet, invisible life that Maria had constructed to protect them, both from complications of her extraordinary past in the weeks that followed. The Federal Aviation Administration investigation concluded that, while Maria's flight had violated numerous regulations regarding pilot certification and aircraft operation, the extraordinary circumstances and successful outcome meant no punitive actions would be taken. Instead, the FAA expedited the process for recognizing her Colombian military qualifications and converting them to civilian certification, acknowledging that her skills and experience exceeded requirements for commercial helicopter pilot licensing. Catherine's Medical Center was also grappling with implications of having discovered that one of their employees possessed capabilities that could revolutionize their emergency medical services program. Dr. Mitchell approached Maria with a proposal that would allow her to remain at St. Catherine's while transitioning to a role utilizing her aviation skills. "We'd like to offer you a position as our senior life flight pilot," Dr. Mitchell said. "The salary would be significantly higher than your current position, and you'd be working with a medical team that already knows and respects your capabilities." The offer represented the possibility of building a new career while maintaining stability and community connections that Maria and Isabella had established. It would mean staying in the same area where Isabella could complete high school and attend college, while allowing Maria to return to the aviation career that had defined so much of her identity. Maria accepted the position, and over the following months, she transformed not only her own life but the entire life flight program at St. Catherine's. Her ability to complete missions in challenging weather conditions expanded the hospital's service area and improved their response capabilities. For critical patients, her techniques and approaches were being taught to other pilots, improving their ability to complete rescue missions that would previously have been impossible. David Chen made a remarkable recovery, regaining significant function below his injury level and returning to work with only minor limitations. Margaret Thompson not only recovered completely from her brain injury but also became a volunteer coordinator for the hospital's family support program, helping other families navigate the challenges of serious medical crises. 6 months after the rescue mission that had transformed her life, Maria Santos stood before a graduating class of hospital employees, delivering the keynote address at St. Catherine's Medical Center's annual recognition ceremony. The woman who had once been invisible to most of these people was now speaking to them about courage, service, and the importance of using whatever talents you possess to help others in their time of greatest need. "When I started working at this hospital 3 years ago, I thought my role was simply to clean the floors and empty the trash," Maria began, her English now confident and clear. "I didn't realize that being part of this hospital community would eventually require me to use skills and experience I had kept hidden, or that one day I would have the opportunity to save lives using capabilities that most people never knew I possessed." Isabella sat in the front row, wearing her high school graduation cap and gown. She would be starting her pre-med studies at the State University in the fall, supported by a scholarship that had been established in her mother's honor. The 17-year-old had grown into a confident young woman who understood that her mother's courage had created opportunities not just for their family, but for other immigrant families throughout their community. "I learned that day that we all have obligations to use our talents to help others, even when doing so requires us to take risks or reveal parts of ourselves that we have kept private," Maria continued. "The patients who needed help that morning didn't care about my immigration status, my employment history, or the regulations that might have prevented my flight. They needed someone with the skills to reach them, and I happened to be the person who could provide that help." The applause that followed Maria's speech was sustained and emotional, reflecting the deep respect and admiration that she had earned from colleagues who had come to understand her true character and capabilities. But more importantly, it reflected their appreciation for the lesson she had taught them about looking beyond surface appearances to recognize the extraordinary potential that exists within ordinary people. After the ceremony, Maria and Isabella walked together through the hospital corridors, where Maria had once worked as a cleaner, now wearing the flight suit that marked her status as one of the most skilled and respected members of the medical team. The transformation was complete, but it was also ongoing. Maria continued to face new challenges and opportunities that required her to grow and adapt to her changed circumstances. "Mama, do you ever miss the quiet life we had before?" Isabella asked as they passed the areas where Maria had once mopped floors and emptied trash cans. "Mia, I miss the simplicity of that life sometimes," Maria replied honestly. "But I don't miss the feeling that I was hiding who I really was. Now I can use all of my skills and experience to help people, and you can be proud of both what I did in Colombia and what I'm doing here in America." As they reached the helipad where Life Flight 2 set ready for the next emergency call, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from the mountains of Colombia to the skies above an American hospital. The path had been difficult and complicated, marked by sacrifice and uncertainty, but it had ultimately led to a life where she could serve others using the full range of her capabilities and experience. "Sometimes the most important thing we can do is be ready when others need us," Maria told her daughter as they looked at the helicopter that had become the symbol of her transformation. "We don't always know when that moment will come, but when it does, we have to be prepared to act with courage and conviction." 1 year after the rescue mission that had changed everything, Maria Santos had become something of a legend not just at St. Catherine's Medical Center, but throughout the regional emergency medical services community. Her story had inspired other immigrants to speak up about their professional backgrounds, leading to the discovery of highly qualified doctors, engineers, teachers, and other professionals who had been working in jobs that didn't match their education and experience. The scholarship fund, established in Maria's honor, had grown to over $200,000. Providing financial assistance to dozens of students from immigrant families who were pursuing careers in healthcare and emergency services. Isabella had been one of the first recipients, but many others had followed, creating a pipeline of diverse talent that was enriching the entire medical community. As evening approached on this anniversary of her transformation, Maria stood on the hospital's helipad, preparing for what had become a routine night shift. The radio crackled with an incoming emergency call, a climbing accident in mountains, with weather conditions that were challenging, but within the expanded operational parameters that her presence had made possible for the Life Flight program. Life Flight 2, we have a multi-casualty mountain rescue, weather marginal but flyable, came the dispatch. Multiple agencies requesting your specific response to the terrain and conditions. Maria smiled as she moved toward the helicopter, joined by her medical crew who had become not just colleagues but friends who trusted her skills implicitly. Dr. Patterson was working late and volunteered to take the call, while Sarah Chun and Rebecca Martinez completed the team that had flown together on dozens of missions since that first dramatic rescue. "Another day at the office," Sarah Chun joked as they began their pre-flight preparations. "Every day we get to save lives is a good day," Maria replied, settling into the pilot's seat with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had found her true calling. "Ready for another adventure?" As Life Flight 2 lifted off into the darkening sky, carrying Maria Santos toward another emergency, another opportunity to use her skills in service of strangers who needed help, the transformation that had begun with a simple decision to step forward and speak up continued to ripple outward. The story of the hospital cleaner who became a hero had become more than just an inspiring tale. It had become a catalyst for change that was helping an entire community recognize and utilize the hidden talents and capabilities of all its members. The helicopter disappeared into the distance, its navigation lights blinking steadily as it carried its crew toward another mission. Below, in the hospital corridors where Maria had once pushed a cleaning cart in silence, new employees from around the world were beginning their own journeys toward finding their place in America. carrying their own hidden talents and dreams. Their own stories of sacrifice and hope. Some of them might spend years cleaning floors or washing dishes or performing other jobs that didn't match their education and experience. But Maria's story had planted seeds of possibility throughout the community, creating an environment where exceptional people didn't have to remain hidden forever, where extraordinary circumstances could reveal extraordinary capabilities, and where the courage to step forward when others needed help could transform not just individual lives but entire communities. The radio crackled again with updates from the mountain rescue scene, and Maria's voice came back calm and professional, reassuring emergency responders that help was on the way. She was no longer invisible, no longer hiding her capabilities, and no longer afraid to be exactly who she had always been, someone willing to risk everything to save lives when others could not act out in the distance. The lights of the city spread out below like a constellation of hope, representing thousands of people pursuing their own dreams of a better life in America. Among them were countless stories of hidden talent and untapped potential, of people like Maria Santos who carried within themselves the skills and experience to make extraordinary contributions if given the opportunity and the courage to step forward when their unique abilities were needed most. The story of the hospital cleaner who piloted the life flight that saved them all would be told and retold for years to come, inspiring others to look beyond surface appearances and recognize the remarkable potential that exists within ordinary people. It had become more than just a rescue story. It had become a reminder that heroes often hide in plain sight, waiting for the moment when their particular combination of skills, experience, and courage could make the difference between tragedy and triumph. As Life Flight 2 reached the accident scene and began another delicate approach through challenging terrain, Maria Santos continued writing her story, not just as a pilot or a former cleaner or an immigrant who had made good, but as a human being who had discovered that sometimes the most important thing you can do is be ready to answer when others call for help, using whatever gifts you possess to serve those who need them most. The helicopter touched down safely, and the medical crew rushed toward another group of people whose lives hung in the balance. And Maria Santos, no longer invisible, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, prepared once again to use her extraordinary skills in service of ordinary people who had found themselves in extraordinary circumstances, proving once more that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are exactly the ones the world needs most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.